April 1945. A quiet village near Erfurt, Germany, sits under a heavy gray sky. The spring air is cold. Mud clings to the boots of 30 American soldiers standing in a cobblestone square. They belong to a forward reconnaissance platoon. Surrounding them are 500 German soldiers. The Germans are exhausted. Their uniforms are torn. They are completely demoralized and ready to give up. They want to surrender. But 30 men trying to guard 500 prisoners creates an impossible tactical equation. The platoon cannot move forward with 500 captives trailing behind them. They cannot leave them behind because the enemy weapons are stacked just a few yards away. 500 men could easily overpower 30 guards in a heartbeat. The Americans are completely stuck. They are frozen by their own success, waiting for a solution to a battlefield crisis that has no good answer. General Patton will resolve it. This is the story of an Apache sergeant who found an unconventional way to force 500 enemy soldiers to guard themselves during a chaotic battlefield crisis. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to our channel. We tell the World War II stories that show the split second that rewrites a soldier's life. Sergeant First Class William Lightfoot was 28 years old. He came from San Carlos, Arizona. He served in a forward reconnaissance platoon within General Patton's Third Army. Lightfoot was an Apache man who grew up listening to the stories of his elders, learning how to track through empty deserts, and read the slight disturbances in the dirt. He enlisted right after Pearl Harbor because he believed in defending his homeland, even if that homeland had not always been fair to his people. He had seen the bloody fields of Normandy. He had lost his younger brother to an artillery shell outside Metz, a loss that left a cold, permanent ache in his chest. Now he was the platoon sergeant responsible for 30 young, tired American soldiers. His job was to spearhead the advance into the heart of Germany, pushing through unknown territory to clear a path for the heavy armor. His tracking instincts and quiet discipline had kept his men alive through months of brutal winter combat, but nothing in his training had prepared him for the sudden, massive surrender in the village near Erfurt. Major Ernst von Schill was 42 years old. He came from an aristocratic family in Potsdam. He commanded the remnants of a beaten infantry battalion. Von Schill believed entirely in the old Prussian military elite, viewing war as a grand chess match meant for noblemen. He wore a tailored wool tunic that showed no dirt from the retreat. His leather riding boots were freshly polished by an orderly, and a gleaming iron cross hung precisely below his collar. He carried himself with an unearned privilege, acting as though his family crest could protect him from the reality of total defeat. When his position was bypassed, he chose to surrender his 500 men rather than fight to the death. He believed that an officer of his stature deserved a comfortable, dignified captivity far away from the mud. He assumed the Americans would immediately provide trucks, hot rations, and a senior officer to receive his sword. He stood at the head of his massed, disarmed troops, waiting to hand over his responsibilities to someone he considered an equal. Instead, he found himself staring at a quiet Apache sergeant who had no intention of playing by the old rules. By April 1945, the Allied advance into the German homeland had shattered the enemy's defensive lines, turning the theater into a fluid, chaotic landscape of rapid breakthroughs and sudden collapses. General Patton's Third Army was moving with a ferocious, relentless speed, bypassing large pockets of resistance to strike deep into the heart of Thuringia. The German government was crumbling. Communications were completely broken, and the once mighty military infrastructure had dissolved into isolated units left without orders. In this environment, forward reconnaissance platoons frequently operated miles ahead of the main supply columns, cut off from immediate reinforcements and navigating towns that had never seen an American uniform. The sudden collapse of enemy morale meant that small units often encountered thousands of soldiers eager to surrender rather than die for a lost cause. Other American officers had occasionally let these massive surrenders slide, allowing disarmed enemies to wander backward toward the rear lines without escorts just to keep the advance moving forward. This created a highly dangerous situation, leaving large groups of unmonitored, military-aged men loose in the immediate rear areas, where they could easily rearm or ambush vulnerable supply trucks. The sheer speed of the push meant that standard operating procedures for handling prisoners of war were completely unworkable on the ground. Platoon leaders were forced to make instant, unprecedented decisions to balance security with the absolute mandate to maintain their forward momentum. Back in the village square near Erfurt, the clock was ticking as 30 American soldiers stood in the cold mud, surrounded by hundreds of men waiting for a resolution to an impossible tactical bottleneck. Lightfoot walked across the muddy cobblestones toward the front line of the massed German battalion. He stopped 3 paces from the polished boots of the German commander. The American soldiers behind him kept their rifles raised. "Where is your commander?" the major asked. "I am the platoon sergeant," Lightfoot said. "You are surrendering to me." The German officer looked at the sergeant's face, noting his features with a visible sneer. He adjusted his tailored wool tunic and tapped his riding crop against his leg. "This is absurd," the major said. "I am an aristocrat from Potsdam, and I command 500 disciplined soldiers of the Reich. I will not hand my sword to an individual of your primitive lineage." "You surrendered your men," Lightfoot said. "They are now your responsibility." "I demand to speak with a full colonel or a general officer," the major answered. "Your military has regulations regarding the dignity of senior officers. We require immediate transport to a proper camp, hot rations for my staff, and an escort that matches our rank. We will not sit in the mud under the supervision of 30 men. "I have 30 soldiers," Lightfoot said. "You have 500 men." The major laughed, looking back at his massed troops. "Then you have a mathematical problem, Sergeant. If you cannot guard us, you cannot hold us. Perhaps we should simply take our weapons back and resume our duties. 30 men cannot stop 500 if we decide to walk away. If your men cooperate, everyone lives," Lightfoot said. "If they don't, this ends badly for everyone right here." The German major stepped forward, his polished boot stopping inches from the mud on Lightfoot's boots. He pointed a gloved finger at the sergeant's chest. "You do not understand your place," he said. "A primitive tribal soldier does not give orders to a Prussian officer. Your numbers are weak. Your authority is a joke. We will wait here until a real American officer arrives to treat us with the respect our blood demands. I refuse to take orders from you." Lightfoot did not move. He did not raise his rifle. He looked at the major for a long moment, reading the arrogance in the man's posture. He knew his 30 men were stretched too thin to handle a riot. He turned to his corporal and gave a quiet order. "Get on the radio," Lightfoot said. "Call up the chain. Tell them we have a bottleneck in the village." The corporal hurried back to the command jeep and began shouting into the receiver. The message passed through the company radio net, jumped to the battalion headquarters, and cleared the regimental switchboard within minutes. The report reached Patton within the hour. Patton's jeep pulled up to the cobblestone square. 4 stars gleamed on his helmet, and his ivory revolvers rested on his belt. The general walked in unannounced, his presence instantly freezing every man in the area. The low murmur of 500 prisoners died away into absolute silence. The 30 American guards snapped to attention. Patton walked directly toward the German officers, his boots striking the stone with a rhythmic, heavy sound. His face was a mask of cold steel. He did not shout. He did not wave his arms. He simply stopped and looked at the German major. Patton studied him, his eyes moving over the tailored tunic, the polished leather, and the gleaming iron cross. "Who is in command here?" Patton asked. "I am Major Ernst von Schill," the officer said. "I am waiting for a proper escort." "Did you surrender your battalion?" Patton asked. "I did," the major replied. "But I refuse to negotiate with a primitive sergeant. Are these 500 men your soldiers?" Patton asked. "They are my men," the major answered. "But your numbers cannot possibly manage us." Patton looked at the mass of German troops, then looked back at the major. "You think your old bloodlines and your polished boots give you the right to choose who holds your leash. You stand here in the dirt and believe your hierarchy still exists. You think a sergeant from Arizona is beneath your dignity because he does not carry a family crest. You are mistaken. That sergeant has fought across Europe while you retreated into this corner. He has kept his men disciplined while your battalion fell apart. He represents the army that broke your lines, and his authority is my authority." You surrendered because you were beaten. You do not get to dictate the terms of your own captivity. You do not get to complain about the numbers holding the gate. You have a choice, Patton said. You will make your own officers responsible for keeping these 500 men in order. Your major will command his captains. Your captains will command your sergeants, and your sergeants will keep every private sitting in a straight row. You will maintain your own discipline under our supervision. If your men cooperate, everyone lives. If they do not, I will let my sergeant solve this problem his own way. Your discipline will keep your men alive, or your pride will destroy them. Decide now. The German major looked at Patton's cold eyes, then looked at the ivory revolvers on his belt. He swallowed hard, his posture collapsing as his arrogance left him. He bowed his head and stepped back into the formation. Major von Schill stepped back toward his men with a pale face and rigid shoulders. He turned toward the crowded square and raised his chin, his voice trembling slightly as he gave his first directive. The German command structure instantly transformed into a machinery of self-containment. The major shouted for his 3 captains, who ran forward and stood at attention in the mud. Those captains then summoned their respective non-commissioned officers, and within minutes, the entire body of 500 prisoners began to move with mechanical discipline. The German soldiers sat down on the cold cobblestones in neat, organized rows, packing tightly together under the watchful eyes of their own leaders. Lightfoot assigned exactly 5 American soldiers to watch the perimeter of the square and monitor the heavy stack of abandoned enemy weapons nearby. The remaining 25 Americans immediately mounted their jeeps and continued the platoon's forward advance, leapfrogging out of the village to pursue their original reconnaissance mission. Behind them, 500 enemy troops remained completely motionless in the center of the village, held in place entirely by their own internal habits of obedience. A larger American combat unit arrived 2 hours later to find the square completely quiet, taking formal custody of a massive battalion that had guarded itself without a single shot being fired. Sergeant First Class William Lightfoot returned to San Carlos, Arizona, after the war ended. He worked on a cattle ranch, married his childhood sweetheart, and raised 4 children in the quiet desert landscape. He recovered fully from the physical exhaustion of the European campaign, but he kept the memories of his fallen comrades close to his heart. He rarely spoke about his time in the Third Army, choosing instead to focus on his community and his family. He passed away quietly in August 1989 at the age of 72, remembered by his neighbors as a man of immense dignity and unspoken strength. Major Ernst von Schill faced a military tribunal later that year for his actions during the retreat. He served 3 years in an Allied prison facility. Before being released during the Reconstruction period, he returned to a ruined Potsdam, where his family's old estate had been completely demolished during the heavy bombardments. He spent his remaining years working as a clerk in a local government office. Bitter about the collapse of the old world order, but entirely forgotten by the public, he died in anonymity in 1974, still holding on to a small piece of his tailored uniform fabric. General Patton never mentioned the incident in his public press conferences, but he kept the platoon's tactical report inside his personal desk drawer until his death. He wrote a brief note in the margin of the document that revealed his private thoughts on the matter. An Apache sergeant used the enemy's own machine to lock its gears, Patton wrote. He understood that a defeated major will still hold his line if it lets him feel like a commander. Some historians have argued that General Patton's decision to leave an enemy battalion under the control of its own officers was a dangerous violation of basic security protocols. They contend that 30 American soldiers were far too few to ensure safety, and that the German troops could have easily turned on their captors if a single order had been disobeyed. Others have argued the opposite, suggesting that Patton showed a brilliant understanding of military psychology by leveraging the rigid discipline of the Prussian officer corps to solve an impossible logistics bottleneck. What is certain is that the forward advance of the Third Army continued without delay, and 500 prisoners were successfully processed without a single casualty. If you had been in General Patton's position, Would you have left the German major in charge of his own men, or would you have stripped the officers of their rank and risked a bottleneck? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more stories about the split second that rewrites a soldier's life, make sure to subscribe.